Hello, this is Jim Malloy, Lexington Town Manager, and this is the fiscal year 23 budget presentation. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Lexington's local government fiscal condition has remained strong and stable, which can be attributed to our strong tax base and our conservative fiscal management. Over the last 2 fiscal years, Lexington has benefited from 2 federal funding bills, as well as FEMA reimbursements for many of our expenses during the pandemic. First, we had the CARES Act, and now we have the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, that have covered many of our pandemic-related expenses, including supplies and staffing. Going forward, ARPA will further support the town's public health response and economic recovery. Federal funding is supplemental to the town's operating budget and is not included in this presentation. The town will likely face a new wave of economic challenges in the coming years. We are planning for these challenges and expect the town's fiscal condition to remain strong as we continue to adhere to our stated fiscal guidelines and conservative management. In budget highlights, the fiscal year 23 budget, as proposed, is balanced and addresses key select board priorities and long-term financial goals, including the use of revenue allocation model and the development of town and school budgets, which allocated both town and school an increase of 4.4% over the fiscal year 22 budget. Implementation of a new fiscal guideline to dedicate new commercial tax levy growth to anticipated capital investments, most notably the new high school construction project. Dedicating funds into reserves, including a set aside of free cash in the Capital Stabilization Fund and other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. We are going to continue to transition away from using free cash for the operating budget with an anticipated completion in fiscal year 24. We had a 5-year phased out plan to go from $3.5 million of our reserves that were going into the operating budget to get that down to 0. After this year's budget, we'll only have about $700,000 to $750,000 next year that needs to be phased out, and that'll be the final phasing out. And then continue our robust investments in the town's capital assets and increasing the amount financed with cash instead of long-term debt to recognize long-term savings in interest costs. And this is possible by phasing out of the use of free cash to support our operating budget. On the general fund revenue sources, property tax is projected to bring in $212.1 million in fiscal year 23, which is 81.5% of our total revenue. And then state aid is approximately $16.8 million, which is 6.4% of our total revenue. And then local receipts at $13.5 million equals about 5.2% of our revenue. And then other available funds at about $18.5 million is 7.1% of our total revenue. We have revenue offsets that equal about $2.3 million, which is a little bit less than 1% that's taken off the top. And then we have enterprise receipts at about $1.8 million, or just under 1% at 0.7%. This chart shows the revenue growth from fiscal year 11 to 23, both in real dollars and percent increases. You'll see that over the last several years, we've seen a relatively flat and decreasing percent increase from fiscal year 18 through fiscal year 23. We did have one increase in fiscal year 22, which was the result of some very conservative financial planning in fiscal year 21, where we held back about $3.25 million in free cash allocations, and then that was allocated in fiscal year 22. We did that because we were not sure what our impact would be due to the pandemic financially, and we wanted to make sure that we had enough money in reserves to take care of whatever issues arose during that period of time. On the select board's priorities and principles, their priorities are the construction of a new police station. This budget recommends construction funding for the new police station at 1575 Massachusetts Avenue and funds to support operations at a temporary police facility at 173 Bedford Street. The budget proposes $32.4 million be appropriated for construction at a special town meeting that is going to be held concurrently with the annual town meeting this year, to be followed by a referendum in June of this year to exclude debt service in this facility from the limits of Proposition 2.5. Support for public health and safety. We include in this budget funding to permanently transition our existing part-time public health nurse into a full-time position, a training mannequin for paramedics, and additional training for police officers to support the new requirements in the state's police certification program, also known as POST. Community mental health programs. This budget includes a contract with the William James Interface Mental Health Referral Service, which is shared between the municipal and school department budgets. In addition, the town expects to utilize ARPA funds to add mental health clinical services in the Human Services Department. On the pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle safety and town roads, we overall have just under $3.7 million recommended for the construction of new sidewalks, existing sidewalk improvements, street and signal improvements, plus just under $5 million for the Battle Green streetscape improvements. This budget also funds an additional crossing guard at Hastings Elementary School and recommends funding to develop a town-wide pedestrian and bike plan. On sustainability, this budget includes funding to update the town's climate action plan and is factored in costs for electric vehicles for the recreation, public facilities, and police department budgets as the town begins to implement the select board's electric vehicle policy. The general fund budget by cost center. School department is recommended at $131.5 million, which is a 3.9% increase in their budget, and it accounts for approximately 54.7% of the overall spending. Then we have shared expenses between the municipal and school side of the budget, which is estimated at $64.2 million, which is going down by about 0.5% and equals 26.7% of overall spending. And then we have municipal departments, which are projected and recommended at $44.8 million, which is 4.4% increase and equals about 18.6% of our overall spending. On the municipal operating budget, this again shows those same percentages, education at 55% of the overall budget, and then the shared expenses of benefits, debt service, and public facilities account for another 26% of the budget. And then the remaining municipal departments are broken down by the DPW, which is about 5% of spending, law enforcement, which is about 4%, fire protection, which is about 3%, the library at 1%, human services at 1%, land use at 1%, overall administration at 3%, and then innovation and technology at 1%. Capital improvement and debt management. In fiscal year 23 capital improvements, we've included, as I previously stated, the reconstruction of a police station at $32.4 million, reconfiguration of the Battle Green intersection at $5 million, the Lexington High School feasibility study at $1.83 million, playground and park safety enhancements and updates at $4.5 million, pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle safety at $3.8 million, town and school technology, $2.6 million, other town and school building envelope and systems at $2.5 million, and the center recreation complex bathrooms and maintenance building at $915,000. And then we have a recommendation on debt management to appropriate $800,000 from the capital stabilization fund for exempt debt as anticipated during the override for the fire station, LCP in Hastings. On the reserve fund balances, we've seen our reserve funds continue to grow, but also level off over the last 3 years for the most part. We have seen an increase in our OPEB reserve fund, which is shown as the gray bar, and right now is at a little over $24 million. And then on future considerations, first, it's the long-term impact of COVID-19 pandemic on town revenue, expenses, and operations, including recent economic challenges such as supply chain delays and inflation and what that's doing to a number of our capital projects. Managing operating expenses to align with revenue growth is becoming increasingly challenging and may require realigning the municipal, school, and shared expense budgets in the future years. Future debt service is expected to include the construction funding for the Lexington Police Station and the renovation or reconstruction of Lexington High School. Both are expected to be excluded from Proposition 2.5 property tax limits. And then the impact of the Hartwell Avenue zoning initiative and new commercial development, accompanied by the town's new fiscal guideline for dedicating new levy growth to capital projects, which in turn is expected to relieve the residential tax burden of these two large projects, the police station and Lexington High School. Thank you very much.